to The Plain Truth, a show where we try to explore some of the mysteries and questions and geopolitics of the day. I'm your host, Plain, and joining me today, we have Oolong Rabbit, Alan, and a special guest, Ziad Fadel. Ziad, you are familiar with Syria, and you've been in the United States for over 30 years, right? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a little bit of an introduction to what you've been doing?
I came to the United States when I was 6 years old, back in 1957. But my father was very strong about the old country, and every summer from that time on, I was back in the Middle East, spending time in both Syria and Lebanon with family. And I'm very, very accustomed to being in Syria. And in fact, I have a home there in Latakia. And I'm married to a Syrian girl from Latakia. And I'm a member of the Ba'ath Party since 1981. And I've been there during wars. And I've been, in fact, I was in Syria in 1982 in February, outside the city of Hama during the time when people said that General Assad killed X number of people there in an effort to stanch a revolt against his government. I was there, I saw it with my own eyes, and I know the essence of lying. And I've seen it all the time, and I'm seeing it now with the Obama administration. I went to the University of Michigan. I have credits from Harvard University. I was a fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. I had a PhD candidacy from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I'm a lawyer, been practicing for 34 years.
Well, thanks. Well, today we just want to get into the situation, mostly with Syria, but then also a little bit of the background of the Muslim Brotherhood and I guess you would say the groups that are trying to rearrange the Middle East. So that would, of course, all include parts of Israel or Turkey or whatever. But perhaps you can give us a little bit of a background as to how this whole thing started. I mean, the Arab Spring, of course, is in many ways similar to the Arab Spring right before World War I. It was a British strategy with Lawrence of Arabia to try to redraw the borders and get ready for World War I. And so in this current situation, Syria is just a part of that broader grand scheme of rearranging and cutting up all the countries. But could you give us a little bit of the background? When did you realize that a big war was coming, or what was how did the government or the leadership class there, how did they respond, that kind of thing?
Are you talking about the war that's coming now, with all the talk about firing Tomahawk missiles at Syria?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, this is...
Well, Ziad, what I'm trying to say is that, for example, when did you think that they were going to attack with this strategy of terror gangs, insurgents, and that kind of thing?
This has been a process. There's evidence to indicate that at least since 2007, Robert Ford, the Saudi Arabian intelligence services, and other parties were putting together a plan, which didn't have to necessarily start in 2007, to destabilize Syria. And the reason for that, of course, is this notion, what King Abdullah of Jordan once called the Shiite crescent. The idea being that there's a majority of Shiites in the Fertile Crescent who, if allowed to connect to one another, would be a threat to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Emirates, and also to the Zionist abomination, which you call it Israel if you like. And all of that could be stopped if you could just simply separate Syria from, say, southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah is located, from Iraq, which is a majority Shiite country also, and certainly from Iran, which is the fountainhead of political Shiism. The idea was that, and I think the theory was that because Syria is such a mosaic state, so many minorities, that you could actually put minorities against one another or against the larger Sunni population, cause disruption, and therefore break Syria away from this Shiite crescent. They tried doing it initially, and if you guys remember it all, it's kind of funny. Mr. John Kerry, who's now blathering constantly in Washington about the need to hit Syria, was a personal friend of Dr. Assad. And there are pictures of him having dinner with Dr. Assad and his lovely wife. And there was a discussion here in the United States about how how liberal and how secular he was and how easy it might be to break him away from this Iranian thing. Didn't work. Eventually, Assad went from being the JFK of the Middle East to something along the lines of Satan, Beelzebub, and other forms of demonization that the U.S. media now is trying to foist on the American people. This whole policy started back in 2007. It went through stages. First, they thought it might be enough to get him. We can get him to leave by having this revolt. Well, he didn't leave. The Russians don't care that much. We can put more pressure on him by sending in foreigners and sort of making his army, putting his army through some kind of hoops and things like that. And eventually, officers would probably, revolt and overthrow him, and we get rid of him that way. It went through stage, until finally they couldn't do anything. And now, as the Syrian army is winning every battle, everywhere in Syria, the Saudi Arabians made it very clear to the United States, and this is through Bandar bin Sultan, this ape head of
Bandar Bush,
Bandar
our
Bush,
friend,
Mr. Blue Jeans, and he's quite a moron, by the way, but nonetheless, it was put to the United States this way to Mr. Obama. We don't have any faith in the United States anymore. If you can't do something for us, like getting rid of Assad, then we may have to go our own way, whatever that means. Israel's on board. Turkey's definitely on board. That's the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way. And now we have the United States with a moderately sized flotilla in the Mediterranean with Tomahawk missiles facing off with the Russian flotilla and facing off against Syria with this very, very large arsenal of anti-ship missiles called the Yakhunts, and also their S-300s and their Pantsir anti-aircraft missile defense system. This is going to be a mess. I feel sorry for you. As Americans have to go through this again, this is going to be bloodier than Iraq.
Well, I think, first, let's, of course, hope that it doesn't come to that. But I was listening to, what's her name? Sharmina Narwani recently, and she argued that the Saudis are in a total crisis because they feel that their system will collapse if they don't smash the Shia world, because the population and the oil in Saudi Arabia are in the Shia area, and that the power, of course, is, in other words, they have an unpopular dictatorship.
It's a dictatorship that, in fact, it's amazing because it's actually a medieval dictatorship. It's amazing.
Yeah, of course. It's one of the worst places. I mean, slavery, you name it. So there's not much to recommend there.
Sorcery, yes.
So the point then is that, I guess what I'm trying to say is, to many of us in the West, we look at this and say, well, can't there be some pipeline compromise? Gazprom gets a different percentage of this and Exxon gets a different percentage of the other, and then we avoid this war. But if, for example, Saudi Arabia feels that it's on its last legs and it simply has no choice to, pay all this money, then that makes it much harder to stop a war. What are your thoughts on Saudi Arabia's view of this?
I agree with you. I would add also that there's a theological problem in this whole mess too. The Saudi Arabians, who in my opinion are as far from real Islam as you are maybe from Shintoism. I know you're in Japan, but I mean they are a weird form of Islam which is practiced in Saudi Arabia, and they have a genuine fear of Shiite Iran. The Iranian culture is a very dynamic culture. I can't deny that. I mean, to think that they could live under all these sanctions and yet have a very powerful internal intellectual cadre of technocrats and able to build reactors, they are amazing. They can build their own cars. The Saudis can't build a bicycle. A Saudi Arabian officer in their army.
Wouldn't that be haram?
Well,
just
a
kidding.
Bicycle haram for a woman, for a man.
For a woman to build a bicycle would be haram. For those who don't know, haram is un-Islamic.
It is not kosher, basically.
Yes, exactly.
For Saudi Arabians, and this is a culture of depravity and reaction. They are backward, and they are afraid of Iran because of its immense power its population, its homogeneity. Iran represents a major. It's their bugbear, their bête noire, and we say in French. And the fact of the matter is, the Saudis are also afraid of this gas pipeline you mentioned. It's very important. The natural gas, which is being planned right now to be shipped from or piped from Iran across Iraq to Syria, and then coupled with Russia's own Gazprom monopoly, as you mentioned very astutely, by the way, means it's a lot of danger to Qatar. Qatar is very threatened by this. They don't want it this way. The Arabians of the peninsula are in a state right now, as you said, of pure terror. And I think they put it to Obama that way with Bandar bin Sultan. You remember how many days ago Bandar went to Russia to offer Putin money to abandon Assad?
Sure, but that's really got to be ridiculous. I mean, it's not an issue of, I mean, the events we're discussing right now are really essentially trillion-dollar events.
Yes.
Because if the Middle East goes up in flames, the world economy will practically collapse. And so when Bandar talks about giving $15 billion to the Russians, I mean, the price of oil tripling right there is going to cost you hundreds of billions of dollars if you're China.
And Putin knew that. Putin knew
of
they
course,
could do this also, by the way.
Well, I guess another question with the Saudis, though, is, I mean, who are they? I mean, who put them in? Are they? I mean, the rumor forever has been that maybe they're Jewish. Now, I certainly don't know that. But, well, I mean, you can say something or not, but I mean, I'm just saying, who are they anyway, officially? Where are they from, really? I mean, weren't they from, like, Jordan or not Jordan, Iraq, was it?
No, the Saudi Arabians are Arabians. They are originally a nomadic people, like all other tribes in Arabia, and they were selected by the British, the Saudis, the heirs of the Saud character, who's a brigand, a thief, probably a pedophile, for all I know, and they were selected to take over Arabia. Well, this upset the Hashemites. And the Hashemites, of course, they are a more dignified family originating in Mecca, were left out in the cold. Well, what could the British do? They had to find some way to assuage their feelings. So the Jordanians, they created a state from southern Syria called Transjordan and plunked down a Hashemite there. And they tried to give the Hashemites Iraq, Mesopotamia. They tried to put the Hashemites in Syria. And it went on and on and on. The British always playing games like that. And eventually what they got was a kind of basically a non-viable state in Transjordan called the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And they have a very wealthy, oil-rich state called Saudi Arabia, where the only thing they have of any import at all or any significance is the oil the white people pump for them. And that's what they control, how they control them. The Saudis could not exist without Europeans, the MI6, the British intelligence services, the CIA protecting them. You're right. They are aware of this. They are terrified of Iran, and they are terrified of the economic possibilities that are taking place right now north of them. The Saudis also are, by the way, Wahhabis. Wahhabis are, I might get a little bit technical on you. If I get boring, stop me right away. Wahhabism is derived from one of the schools of Islam called Hanbalism. Very right-wing, very conservative, extremely, when they read the Quran, it's read so literally that even absurd remarks in the Quran are taken as serious, godly truths. They have also evolved into a theocracy with some of the most inept theologians you can imagine. Those who would behead people for sorcery in the 21st century. Imagine that. Those are the Saudis. And the Saudis, interesting enough, you mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood, despise the Muslim Brotherhood. They view it as a complete threat. That's why when the Muslim Brotherhood was overthrown in Egypt, they were quick to take the place of the United States in terms of funding the new government. Interesting.
What's the story with the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Qatar?
The rivalry has to do with their cousins. Apparently they're cousins. And if you want to go through their genealogy, I mean, if it's any interest to you, you'll find they have some common ancestor. And the Qataris are jealous of the Saudis, as the Saudis are jealous of the Qataris. And there's a sense that the Qataris are little upstart creeps who made a lot of money on natural gas. There's not much oil in Qatar, but a lot of natural gas. And the Qataris view the Saudis as overbearing, backward cousins with not much creativity, and they're right. Not that the Qataris are any smarter. They are cousins, and there's a long history of hostility between the two families.
But do the Qataris back the Muslim Brotherhood?
They do indeed, and that's a problem also. And they probably do it just sort of to pull the chain of the Saudi Arabians they have in Riyadh and Mecca. Yes, they are that childish. You're talking about a race of simian. I mean, these are people who are so backward. It's embarrassing the United States of America views them as allies. They don't let women drive cars. You can't build a church. You can't go to a cinema. You can't have a beer. A woman can't travel without her husband's permission. I mean, these people live not only in the Middle Ages, they live in the Bronze Age. They probably live in the Stone Ages.
Yeah, it just seems like there's a multi-billion-dollar pissing contest going on between the two of them.
As long as they have the oil and the natural gas, yes. Yes, they're rich. They're like Beverly Hillbillies. They just have oil.
But isn't there the other angle? The Muslim Brotherhood really, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, it really looks like a Western-created Freemasonic organization to undermine and destabilize countries in that area.
I've heard people try to tie the Muslim Brotherhood to the Masonic order. I don't see that myself. Muslim Brothers, first of all, it's not a really unified movement. Whenever you find it in different countries, it's a franchise with a lot of independence. For example, Hamas in Palestine is the Muslim Brotherhood. It calls itself Hamas, doesn't say Muslim Brotherhood, and it's independent. They don't necessarily follow the dictates of the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo. They are conservative, oftentimes intellectuals who are misled by certain beliefs, the desire to have the Sharia, canonical Islamic law, enforced in Arab countries. They are, from what I've seen so far, and the few Muslim brothers who've deigned to sit with me, I find them to be very uncreative. They are people who believe in the strict interpretation of the Quran, but they don't go as far as the Wahhabist Arabians. They don't usually call for ridiculous things like women not driving. They wouldn't do that. Many Muslim brothers are doctors, engineers, but again, they're limited by their inability to see the world for what it really is. These are the Muslim brothers I have personally met. President Morsi of Egypt is exactly like that. Exactly what I described him to you. Very limited. The time he gives to the real world is in competition with the amount of time he gives to praying and beating his head on the ground, praying to God. This is the kind of person you have usually with the Muslim Brotherhood. Very limited, very uncreative, and basically a failure in every single country they've ever appeared in.
Sure, but when I was referring to how it has a Freemasonic element, it's not simply, I mean, let's face it, in the West, when in World War II, Britain was fighting Germany, they both had Freemasons. It's not really, I didn't quite mean it that way. I meant it's an organization that's transnational and doesn't really have the loyalty of the nation state, and it's used in a sense as an enemy of fans of the nation state. So taking the classic example of Nasser, I mean, he was at war with the Muslim Brotherhood. I have seen the video where he's mocking the head of the Brotherhood, and I think he was suggesting that all women should have scarves or something while his daughter was in university in Europe or something like that, driving cars and such. And so I kind of look at them as not totally under a Western control, but nonetheless, what they're promoting, like what you just said, focusing on religion, well, that means you're not focusing on developing the nation state. You're not building dams. You're not, you know what I mean? You're not getting anywhere, so to speak. So you by the very nature of that, become easier to control.
They are, by their nature, Islamist. As Islamists, they believe in the Ummah, the community, the Muslim community. They would strive normally to unite Muslims together under the principle of all Muslims being the same, whether they are Pakistani, they don't speak Arabic, blah, blah, blah. But Muslims are Muslims. They have this dream Unfortunately, it's proven to be a bit of a pipe dream. And I think you're right. Now I see what you're getting at. You're talking about Masons or Freemasons. Yes, I think that's a good analysis, a good analogy, and I would agree with you on that.
If I could ask a quick question, why are the Wahhabis, butchering the Christians in Syria? I thought that Islam dictated that they were supposed to protect the people of the book, be it Christians, Jews, Muslims, whatever.
If you heard my words earlier, I said that the Wahhabis are, in my opinion, not Muslim, that they are about as Muslim as maybe our plain as Shintoist. I don't know if he's actually converted to Buddhism at all yet. They are really not Muslim, in my opinion. They are kafara. They are infidels. They have completely misinterpreted the Quran. You are absolutely correct. The Quran is extremely kind towards minority groups like Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians. You would think they would treat them well. They are instead viewed by Wahhabis as infidels. And if you're a takfiri, that's a dangerous word right there, takfiri, Takfiri, that means you arrogate to yourself the power to declare others to be infidels, and therefore you have the right to kill them. That's exactly what's happening in Syria. Sadly, today in the city of Ma'lula, there's one of the most ancient Christian cities in the world, in world history. There are Muslims now, some from Chechnya, who are executing Christians. There have been priests in Syria who've been beheaded because they were viewed as infidels. I know for a fact that one of them refused to convert to Islam and was beheaded with a serrated knife.
Yeah, I saw that video. It was disturbing. I had to shut it off.
And Ziad,
yes,
Ziad, our listeners might be interested to know that city is one of the few left on earth where the local language is Aramaic, which is the language of Jesus.
It's the Western Aramaic, which is spoken by Jesus Christ. They still speak it the same exact way. And right now there are these terrorists inside that city. Our army's trying its best to extract them. But here's what happened. They came into the city after blowing up the major checkpoint to the north. A Jordanian terrorist Wahhabist drove a Mercedes truck, exploded it, and killed about 13 to 14 Syrian soldiers at a checkpoint. When they moved in en masse, they took one boy from every family as a hostage, and they're holding those hostages at this time. The Syrian army is all around the area. They're trying to break into it and to get these terrorists out, but they must take into consideration the lives of the civilians there. So it's not as easy as we might like to think. It's a horrible situation. It's horrible to see a beautiful city like that. I've been there probably 6 times in my life, and to see it being just desecrated by these atheists, these nihilists, these Islamist takfiris who are just about as bad as you can get.
Well, Ziad, I think, though, that you can see that this is a common thing that intelligence agencies use to destabilize countries or other purposes, like to create fear in a population.
Terrorism.
But also internal stuff. If you look in the United States, if you look into various serial murderers and you look into various dangerous cults, you usually find very strong intelligence connections. And, there's money to be made. And you need also patsies when you want to kill political opponents and things like that. So they basically want to control these kind of lunatics. And
assassins is exactly almost like you're talking about the assassination of JFK, where you had this patsy who was apparently connected to American intelligence and possibly to Cuban, groups. Exactly right. It follows a pattern, doesn't it?
Yes, and seriously, there's a very good book by Dave McGowan on serial killers, and basically all of them have very strong connections to the dark side of government, these secret parts of the FBI or CIA. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, look, if they will do something nasty at home, you can be sure they'll do it to a place that they don't care about or like or whatever, like Egypt or Syria. That's really a given.
And by the way, they are training them now in Jordan under the nose of the Jordanian government. You know that there are bases there right now where the CIA, MI6 are training these psychopaths, basically sociopaths. And the ones coming out of Turkey are coming through with the consent of the CIA and the MIT, which is the Turkish intelligence service. You're absolutely correct. There is a connection. And they're picking for some of the most vile and disgusting criminals, as you know, in Saudi Arabia. And this is absolutely true, by the way. We've already translated documents show that the Saudi Arabians were offering men on death row in Saudi Arabia the opportunity to save their own lives by going to jihad in Syria. This has been proven now, and it's still going on. Imagine rapists, sociopathic killers being now recruited by the Saudi intelligence service to go and fight in Syria. And guess what they're doing? Raping girls, beheading priests, beheading sheiks, like the one in Aleppo. It's absolutely horrific.
Ziad, what percentage of these insurgents would you say are even Syrian nationals?
According to a French doctor who was in Turkey about a year and a half ago, he thought 80% were foreigners. I can't go that far. I know that the FSA is a bit bigger than that. Based on my statistics, the ones I've been keeping, I've been chronicling the war in Syria, I would say 60% of the ones being killed today are foreigners from Chechnya, a lot from Libya, Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, and many from Jordan.
I think you had a question you wanted to ask, Alan?
Yes, we're talking about these intelligence agencies, and I've been studying, this stuff for some time. Especially the CIA seems to really want to stir up these wars, and a lot of times I'm not sure why. I think it may be just war for its own sake, or war to create profit, and I think it's getting even worse now in the Middle East. Is this your experience, Ziad, that the CIA is very much involved with fomenting a lot of these conflicts?
It seems like their job is both to collect intelligence and then to use it to foment discord in countries. Like Syria, for example, is viewed as a threat to Israel. It's part of the resistance front. It's a part of that Shiite crescent. It's a part of that movement, part of that gas pipeline thing. It's not, it's not pro-American. And so what we do is we plan and we execute a kind of a scheme to overthrow or at least to destabilize their government. You're absolutely correct. The CIA has been doing that for decades now. Nothing new.
And there's no benefit for Americans, really. The only benefit is for this elite group, whoever they are, who have their own agenda, and we, probably don't have a clue as to all of the facets of that particular agenda.
Certainly bankers. One would think of bankers immediately. Sure.
Hey, Ziad. Yes. I, the other day, was watching somebody put on YouTube a bit from James Baker, if you know who he was, the consigliere for the Bush family.
He was the secretary, yeah, exactly.
And he, I think he let slip something. They were talking about the wars and revolutions in the Middle East. And essentially he said, well, what we really want to see is what happened to Eastern Europe after the fall of communism.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, what happened? Well, Western corporations moved in and took over.
Absolutely.
Western corporations and Western banks. And so, let's face it, if your currency is controlled by Western banks, if your food supply is controlled by Western corporations, and so on and so forth, if your cars are supplied by Western corporations, you can elect whatever prime minister you want, but he has no power.
I agree.
I think so. So, Alan, your question about what might they want? Well, just a corporate takeover in and of itself means that it really is no longer an independent country.
With Syria, you have that aspect to it. I don't dispute that at all. But with Syria, it's almost an insane kind of onslaught. The idea is not just merely to try to change it into something that's pro-American, but instead to destroy it. The idea is that we can't maybe make Syria a pro-American enclave, but we can definitely turn it into a failed state and therefore break Iran's grip on that area of the world, the Shiite area, the Shiite crescent, the one that's now challenging Israel. Israel's scared to death. Iran's power is growing constantly. We've got to think of it that way. With the Eastern European countries, we had the issue of Gorbachev and Glasnost. And it was drifting away, and we wanted to bring our kind of democracy into the Eastern European area, coupled with what you said, the idea of just simply breaking their will and making them vassals of an American empire. Yes, and I think there's part of that in Syria too.
Yeah, the whole thing in the Middle East appears to be a game of destabilization. And if I could, I'm just going to read a small piece that was actually in the New York Times today. They were interviewing an Israeli, Alon Pincus, and he said, "This is a playoff situation in which you need both teams to lose, but at least you don't want one to win. We'll settle for a tie," said Alon Pincus, former Israeli consul general to New York. Let them both bleed, hemorrhage to death. That's the strategic thinking here.
That's the evolution of the American policy, which started out with the idea that the opposition would win, and Assad would simply just resign and go and live someplace else. When that couldn't work, you're absolutely correct. That's really what eventually happened. Was the U.S. is now sort of jockeying to get a position. They're trying to get to a Geneva II, where the opposition is in a position of holding territory that is of significance, and they wanted to help them to do that. Now, how they're going to do that, will that succeed? I don't know. But I know that Obama now is making probably the biggest mistake of his entire career. He's definitely sinking into the very depths now.
It just seems like the biggest power play for Israel is to just keep getting the Shias and Sunnis to fight amongst themselves as long as possible and just rip the Middle East up.
Sure. It's divide and conquer. That's common. The thing that's interesting about the Sunnis in Syria, though, if you'll notice something, what they're saying in the Western media is completely false. The defense minister of Syria is a Sunni Muslim, as General al-Furaj. The deputy chief of staff of the Syrian army is a Sunni Muslim from Arestan, is Talal Tlas. The minister of the interior, who's in charge of 3 security organizations, is a Sunni Muslim, General Ibrahim al-Sha'ar. I can give you names, and you would think that the Sunnis control Syria, not the Alawis, as the Western press keeps trying to promote this idea. The Sunnis in Syria are by and large secular. There's always a certain kind of a slice of the population that's backward, maybe even Wahhabist to some extent. But in general, Sunnis in Syria are not what the Western press is making them out to be. It's not really a Shiite-Sunni war. We're trying to make it that way. The Israelis would like it that way. And if they get their way, it's going to be a horrible slaughter fest there. I hope not.
I think we even saw situations in Iraq where I think British intelligence agents were caught dressed up as Muslims, and I believe they were planning explosives at mosques, to blame it on the other side, right, and just stir up those conflicts.
Nothing new about the British doing that. The British can be extremely malicious.
Oolong, that's their job.
They know it.
I mean, that's what they've been doing all along in Iraq. I mean, we don't hear about it much, but every other day there's a bomb go off, and it's designed to make all the Sunnis run to the Shia neighborhoods, and then the Shia move to their neighborhoods. I mean, it's all the divide and rule strategy.
You are absolutely correct, and it's funny how the Brits and the Americans too have done a good job of understanding the Arabic mentality. The Arabs today are in the third world, and they're easy to understand. They're not complex. All you got to do is you put a bomb in a Shiite mosque. The assumption must be that a Sunni did that, because a Shiite wouldn't do it to his own people. And you create discord and turmoil among peoples that way. Yes.
Well, I've got a question, though. So we're talking about this war that, to many of us, has been obvious that it was coming. And it was, General Wesley Clark talked about it. You've certainly seen him come out and say they're planning these wars. And obviously they were planning these wars. And so it raises questions as to why the different countries weren't better prepared. And it also raises questions as to what their strategies should be or should have been to counter this. So, for example, if Saudi Arabia is willing to fight to the death to destroy Syria, then shouldn't Syria essentially have a counter? Or what has Syria done kind of to counter this strategy?
Syria is surrounded by enemies. To the north, we have Turkey, led by a Muslim Brotherhood fanatic by the name of Erdogan. Syria has an enemy to the south, west of it. It's called Israel, vicious enemy. To the south is Jordan, a tool basically of both the United States, CIA, and MI6. And below that, we have Saudi Arabia with all its financial power trying to undo the country. Syria is trying right now to go through and try to finish the civil war, defeat an enemy who's being funded by very wealthy countries. So Syria does not have the ability right now to pay the Saudis back. The Saudis may fear that down the road, if the turmoil finally ends, that Dr. Assad and his government are going to start doing some bad things to the Saudis. Not a bad idea, by the way. But at the present time, the Syrians are more concerned about maintaining stability as best they can, to maintain continuity of government, than they are about paying the Saudis back for all these insults.
Oh, for sure. But I mean, the point is, this is an existential fight for Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. In other words, Syria is just seen as the weakest point of the three to attack first.
I don't believe that's true. I don't believe it's seen as the weakest point. It is the point which you must break in order to...
Yes, that's a better way of phrasing it. I agree. It's the fulcrum for the whole thing. And so they want to smash it. And so then that raises the question. So Iran is in the fight of its life too. So aren't they in a position to harm Saudi Arabia somehow?
Yes, and you're getting to, now we're kind of pushing forward towards a scenario that might come out if Obama makes the big mistake of hitting Syria with tomahawks. You're absolutely correct. Iran has a mutual defense pact with Syria, has not been called into question yet or has not been invoked yet. But it is very, very possible that Iran will begin destroying the Dhahran oil fields with its missiles and attacking our fleet there in the Persian Gulf. In the meantime, Iran will start firing missiles at Israel, and so will Hezbollah. It's got 40,000 plus missiles, much better than they had in 2006. And Syria has a vast arsenal of missiles. We're talking about a real big mess. And and I think Obama is in over his head right now.
Well, I guess this is a long and tough question, but one thing is what we actually think the strategies are of the different players in this, right? I mean, if Obama were to send 200 tomahawks, I don't know how many would get through, but I mean, what is the point other than to start a huge war?
The point would be there if it's really a limited war, as he suggests. And I don't believe a word he says, by the way. Obama is a professional liar, Chicago politician. We all know what they are. And Kerry's even worse. The point would be to give the opposition a sufficient kind of advantage that they can take over quality territory and go to Geneva II with a real agenda. Right now, if the Syrians are saying credibly that we can't sit with anybody, there's no opposition, there's no unified group that we can talk to, which we can rely on to actually carry out agreements, they're right. The U.S. wants to break the ability of the Syrian army to stop those elements of the opposition whom we believe are most likely to promote an American Zionist agenda. And that's what I think is going on right now. You're absolutely right. There's no other purpose. Bombing Syria with Tomahawk missiles, I mean, what are you going to bomb? The Syrian army is a huge army. And by the way, they have anti-missile cruise missiles. I mean, how this thing will play out, I don't know. Not to mention the Russian Navy and Hezbollah and Iran and all the other people. It's a horrible scenario.
Well, I also think that, like you said, you couldn't trust Obama, or for that matter, the U.S. military at all. So, I mean, if you say that's their strategy, fine. But I would say they would send 200 one day and see your response, and then send 200 2 or 3 days later. Because why not? I mean, if you were in their position, I mean, it's the same issue when Israel attacked a certain number of months ago. If you don't respond, I mean, look, this is the way of the world. Bullies continue with their approach until it hurts. And so I don't know that I would assume that it's more a trick to try to say, see, we're only doing it for this. But if they can get away with 200, then 3 days later it'll be 400 or whatever.
It's very possible.
And so if I were on the the Syrian side of the equation, I would not assume that it's simply a bargaining thing. I would think it's, look, if there's blood in the water, they will create as many genocides in Syria as they can. It's their goal.
Russia has made it very clear, and Russia is a superpower, that they will not tolerate the overthrow of the Assad government. And the U.S., I think, takes them seriously and at their word. That means that the U.S. is now convinced, and they've said it, in fact, we're not doing this in order to overthrow the government of Syria, which would be a war crime anyway. But the fact of the matter is the U.S., I think, is moving towards some kind of negotiating position that is favorable to the American, Saudi, Zionist side. How they do it? By bombing Syria. Here's the problem with the whole scenario. I think General Dempsey, who's kind of like, it strikes me as a bit of a professional soldier with very little political savvy, he's been pretty honest about it. He never wanted to have this war, and I think he was trying to convince everybody that it's too costly. But in any case, the Syrians have Yahout missiles. They have lots of Yahout missiles along the coast. If they fire them and they sink one of our ships, what will the American people think or do when they find out, let's say, the Ramage, R-A-M-A-G-E, one of our destroyers, was sunk by a Yahout missile? Well, that's exactly what Obama may want. Well, I guess it wasn't enough that we fire these Tomahawks. Maybe now we have to start flying F-16s and then these big bombers. And then they're trying to somehow keep exacerbating the situation to the point where we have an all-out war. But then, my friend, we have World War III right around the corner. I mean, you can see it happening. The Russians are thickening their fleet now off the coast of Syria. Eventually, at some point, maybe somebody will make that mistake. It was in Dr. Strangelove or failsafe.
Well, supposedly a few days ago, the Israelis did a missile test.
Yes, that was to light up Syria's anti-aircraft missile defense system, the S-300s and the Pantsers. The Syrians didn't fall for it.
Yeah, but it's still playing with fire.
Oh, I definitely agree with you.
Well,
on that.
I don't know those. Yeah, there are a lot of questions here because, first of all, for those of us who are familiar with the American system of political government and media manipulation, this setup to war is very, very strange because what the American media have done is they've intentionally done, and by the way, what the administration has done is they've done a lot of things that are very, very stupid. And it's hard to understand the logic. So, for example, if you're going to attack after this false flag chemical weapons thing, why not just do it then? And to say, well, we're going to have votes and we're going to do this, and then the British Parliament refuses and on. Look, all of this is just giving it time to build up. And then the world discovers that the whole thing was a fake. And Obama at the G20 comes an hour later, whatever it was, 40 minutes late to the dinner, that kind of thing.
Right.
And anyway, and conservative news sources, well, actually a lot of liberal sources too, are showing all this information. So it makes the war incredibly unpopular inside the U.S. And it's also very incredibly unpopular with veterans or people in the service. So this is very strange because it's kind of like it looks like a setup. I mean, the only one who would want the attack publicly would be Obama. And he would be doing it in such a twisted way, he would look very indecisive or strange. I mean, he's saying, right. And so I don't know. I just have questions. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but it's just that you know that it's controlled. I mean, the British Parliament doesn't get open votes on matters of this importance. Right. I mean, look, the West, these are dictatorial systems, really, when it comes to important issues. And so I just find it strange that you have Obama saying, well, I guess we'll give it to the Congress, but then even if they vote no, I might do it anyway. And, this kind. And I mean, it's almost like I'm expecting him to come out and say, we're going to bomb on such and such a date with such and such a number of missiles or something. And it's like, this makes no sense at all.
Well, don't you think that Obama is doing a Godfather thing too, or maybe a Saddam thing, where he, knows that this thing may not turn out to be all that good in the end, and he doesn't want to be left holding the bag, that I want the Congress to vote for it, that if it goes wrong, nobody can blame me. All of us are in it. We all are complicit in it. Wouldn't that be something that would be typical of a Chicago politician like Obama? I don't think Obama necessarily wanted this to end this way. And maybe he doesn't want his legacy to be one of complete failure, as it will be after this is over with. Instead, he may want to manipulate the system, try to somehow slough off some of the liability by, getting McCain, this idiot McCain, and other crazies in that Senate to back him up on this. So at least he got some comfort, some shield.
I was going to say, I don't think any of us are naive enough to believe that Obama actually makes the decisions anyhow. And from my perspective, I don't think Obama even wants this war, and I think he's been dragging his feet as much as he can to stall it or, see what other options come on the table.
General Dempsey, for the last few months, has been pretty clear that he thought that any attempt to attack Syria would be foolish and costly. Now, Kerry says that the Arabians are paying the cost of it. But any American, all of us here living in this country know fully well that wars just don't end the way you want them to. And that, like I said, if Syria fires one Yachont missile and it does sink an American destroyer, there's going to be some reaction here. Like some people might say, well, that's right because we were attacking them. But a lot might say, especially the Senate or the House of Representatives, well, we can't let them do that. We're Americans. We have to up the ante now on the Syrians. And we've essentially created our own mechanism for getting stuck in another quagmire. And that's what I fear about the American mentality, is that, we have a great country, but we have a cowboy mentality too. We don't like to be beat.
Yeah. But one problem is that so many Americans now know about false flags, and they know about all the deception. And you're even hearing about false flags in some of the mainstream media or the lamestream media.
Absolutely.
So, I agree with what Plain was saying, that this is indeed very, very strange, and I don't understand the strangeness. I really don't.
I think because of people like you, and even my own blogs, we're alternative news sources. It can only happen in this day and age, where people can actually get on the internet and hear different opinions. If you listen to the mainstream media like CNN, BBC, not only do the American public and the British public distrust them. I heard a poll that said that the only 23% of the American public trust the mainstream media. I think you guys are doing more than anybody else in promoting the idea that people can think independently, that we can analyze things.
And the country is becoming more and more this way. So I think it's that the days are numbered for these manipulators. I don't think they're going to succeed in anything they want to do. I really don't.
Let me give you an example of how CNN manipulates. And it's so obvious to somebody who watches this. They had a so-called, quote-unquote, military expert on CNN the other day. He was talking about the Syrian situation. Amazingly, in front of a map, you see the Soviet, I'm sorry, back in the 70s, the Russian fleet actually west of the American fleet. And then he starts talking about how missiles will be fired, but he never mentions once how there might be a possibility that the American fleet might clash with the Russian fleet for whatever reason. Two, he never tells the American listeners that it's not a matter of merely the Syrians hiding their troops from their great American missiles. The Syrians have the ability to react and fire Yachont cruise missiles at us. Never mention the military expert who's supposed to tell us somehow fails to mention the Syrians have the ability to knock our ships out of the water.
How about that?
That's what they do. They're manipulating. It's a part of a Zionist, in my opinion. I don't be offended by this, but I think there's a lot of Zionism in here. You notice that the Zionist organization, AIPAC, B'nai B'rith, are all pushing hard for the U.S. to hit Syria. I wonder why.
That was going to be my next point, actually. The Israeli media seem to have been very quiet about it, or non-committal. But now that the cat's out of the bag and the American people don't want it, you see AIPAC is pushing like hell to get this war going.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. They thought they'd get away with it with just Obama's, his charisma. Didn't work. And the American people are not only tired of war, they're tired of being lied to.
Yeah.
That's what they watch. That's why they listen to programs like yours and and they go to alternative media because they find it's refreshing.
Well, for the longest time, too, if you said the word Zion or Zionism, it was like, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you hate Jews, like just these ridiculous arguments. But it's almost becoming politically acceptable now to criticize Israel and Zionism.
Yes, and I have no reason to fear anything. I'm an Arab, and I had nothing to do with the Holocaust. Our people were just third world people who didn't even know what was going on. I can criticize freely, and people say I'm anti-Semitic. I would just say I'm sorry you feel that way. I just happen to have an attitude towards political Zionism, and it's been cruel towards the Arabic people, towards the Palestinians especially. Sorry.
Well, Ziad, I think this might be a point to get to the bigger issue, and that is what Oolong was talking about Zionism is really kind of something that came out of the City of London crowd, the Balfour Declaration and the Rothschilds.
Right.
Victor Rothschild, the head of British intelligence in World War II, that kind of thing.
Well, I know this very well, and that's probably the cause of the entire mess we have right now in the Near East. Yeah.
Right. But what I'm saying is, in other words, it was kind of a created thing by Western interests for their interests. And in other words, it helps to keep everybody over there divided and conquered, right? So the resources and the control of things like the Suez Canal or whatever are under control, relatively speaking. It also gives them the chance to have a big war if they ever want it, because it's just full of such hopeless anger and I guess you would say abuses and sufferings of different peoples at different times. But the point I would get to is the situation with Syria is actually a much higher question, because this is in many ways a face-off between the U.S., and Britain, I guess you would say, the banking powers of New York and London versus the rest of the world.
Yes.
And now, certainly, let's say Saudi Arabia or Israel are going to be allied with the U.S., of course, but I think there's much more at play here. I mean, you see it in the G20, but I think a major war or the U.S. taking over all of the oil and gas in that part of the world is incredibly damaging to Russia and China. It's actually damaging to all kinds of countries, really, India, all kinds of countries. But I mean, it's a very, very big deal what they're trying to do. And
control energy resources, one of the prime essences of power. There's no question about that. The U.S. and Britain and France certainly want to get their mitts into that. Sure.
Well, what I'm saying though is we pretty much the listeners are going to be familiar with the Russian perspective, right? Okay, but sit back a second and look at it from another guy's perspective. Let's say China's. Okay, China has all kinds of struggles with the U.S., and the U.S. is trying to encircle China, create problems in different places, like with Okinawa or the South China Sea. And China has a tremendous amount of dollars, but when they try to use them, they're stopped. The U.S. always intervenes and says, we won't let you do that. We won't let you do that.
Right.
Right? So they're sitting there in a very awkward position, but they say, that's okay. We've got a UN Security Council vote. If the U.S. ever does something stupid, we can always just veto it, right?
True.
Okay, so the U.S. can't invade Thailand or whatever, can't do something that's really, really harmful to them, or decide to blow up North Korea for no reason, that kind of thing, right? But now you're seeing a situation where the U.S. is saying, not only do they not care about the UN Security Council, they don't care if 80, 90% of the world population is against them, and even if 80, 90% of their own population is against them. And they don't even care if the Congress votes against it.
If Obama is as the word I'm looking for is unscrupulous as we think he is, you're right.
Well, put yourself again. So in other words, I'm saying let's remove Russia from the discussion for a second. Put yourself in the view of, let's say, China, or for that matter, somebody else, Brazil. You're looking at this and you can't be very happy at all. I mean, the U.S. is essentially saying, we want to dominate the world through bombs.
Yes.
It's that simple.
To control energy resources by our power, our military power. Yes. Yes.
And I would argue that other things are going on in the world that are kind of similar without the warlike aspect, like the TPP trade agreement will make all of the countries in it basically American corporate, Wall Street colonies. And it will totally anger China. So why would you agree to this? And the answer is you wouldn't unless the U.S. is threatening all of your politicians or whatever.
And you have also the issue of how the United States keeps borrowing from the Chinese. Well, it's not that you're weakening yourself. Whenever you have, a creditor who expects you to pay back, you have a lot of power with that creditor. I mean, we keep bonds and money we keep borrowing from the Chinese. That strengthens our position here in the United States and actually makes the Chinese weaker, in my opinion. If the Chinese had not loaned that money to the United States, they'd be in a more powerful position today.
Of course. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is when you hear of Bandar Bush offering the Russians $15 billion, look, the Russians and the Chinese are more than familiar with bribery and violence. The Chinese could offer $100 billion and it wouldn't even bother them because they can hardly use their dollars.
Yeah.
So I think this is a big stakes game going on. And if the U.S. backs down or starts losing ships and backs down, it will be a very, very big deal.
The other thing, too, sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, I would just say one other thing is this is the missile age that we're living in. And all of those big boats are sitting ducks, both off the coast of Iran and in the Mediterranean. Absolutely. I mean, fishing boats can come by with missiles that are very damaging. They won't take out a huge aircraft carrier, but missiles are just so powerful today, and boats are very slow.
Yes.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is there's this assumption I always see in the news that this missile or that missile has a 500-mile, range, stuff like that. Yeah, but that's if it's on shore. If you put it on a fishing boat.
You also have these missiles now that Syria has, the Fly Mach 7,
yes.
Sectarian missiles. I mean, you're absolutely correct. The age of the floating, flotilla, the armada may be over. And all it needs now is some war where you can watch the ships just sink into the drink. That's all there is to it.
I think they war gamed a scenario with an invasion of Iran 5 or 6 years ago, and the United States fleet got decimated in the war game.
Well, they are so close to those silkworm missiles of theirs. They manufacture their own, and they have the swarm strategy of little boats floating around destroyers. We can shoot a lot of them down, but one of them is going to get through and blow you up.
Only takes one.
And if you want to close off the Straits of Hormuz, the Iranians can do it and just lickety-split. That's how easy it is. It's the whole thing has to do with energy, in my opinion. It's money, energy. Excuse me, 1 second. I just have to hang up the phone because somebody's called me for some bizarre reason. But there's the issue also of natural gas off the coast of Syria, Cyprus, and Lebanon. You know about the huge reservoirs of natural gas they found. Another issue. The French have their eyes on it. The Turks have their eyes on it. That's why the Turks are so upset about the Cypriots now starting to work towards exploiting those natural gas assets because they got a stake in Cyprus. This is all eventually probably will wind up being a brouhaha over gas. And people will die, trying somehow to position themselves favorably.
Well, what about the pipeline? One question some of us have is, supposedly Saudi Arabia wanted a pipeline, right? And Syria refused in deference to Russia.
Qatar, actually. Qatar was the one who wanted the pipeline straight through Iraq into Syria. And the Syrians refused because they wanted to have the Iranian pipeline.
Wasn't there also a pipeline from Saudi Arabia?
As far as natural gas, the answer is no, because my information. Sorry.
Oh well, the bigger issue is the Qatar, the gas fields between Qatar and Iran. There's no question about that. But anyway, as far as this pipeline question, though, what was your expectation? I mean, did you expect the war to start once they essentially said they were going to go with Iran instead of Qatar, or what did you think at that point?
That'd be a good point to start. The Saudis were so affronted by Syria's adherents or cleaving to a pro-Iranian policy, that I think at that point in time they just decided they have to get rid of President Assad, no matter what it took and how much it costs. And the U.S. tried in the beginning to arrange his demise with a rebellion, silliness about Daraa and call for democracy, pure falderall, by the way, pure baloney. I know fully well that in Daraa there was no call for democracy, but yet that's exactly how it started, and it just got worse and worse. And finally, now we're at the end game, where the U.S. either wins it with a big strike or just simply have to accept the hard, the big punch, right in the kisser.
Well, you have seemed a bit optimistic at times on your blog, let's say the last couple of weeks. I mean, you've been optimistic the last, 6 or 9 months because, let's face it, the Syrian army has been winning, as you say, pretty much every time it fights.
That's all I chronicle, really, yeah.
But the bigger picture, of course, is what the U.S. will do. And you've seemed a bit optimistic in this front. What is your thinking? Is your thinking that basically, I don't know, Russia will handle air defense and not really that much damage can be done, and then, whatever counterattacks the Syrian side makes will be strong enough to end it right there? Or what are you thinking?
I'm thinking that the Syrian army has not yet used its full capabilities. We've been fighting an insurgency in Syria. You don't need Yechont missiles for an insurgency. We have not seen yet the technology and power that Syria can bring to bear in any conflict. Their army is designed to fight the Israelis. Today, they're fighting something else. And it may be the Israelis partly, maybe the United States. The Russians are going to play a role in logistics and intelligence, satellite intelligence, and so the Chinese, by the way. The Russians have made sure that Syrians have sufficient capability to fight off an American attack. There's going to be a lot of damage here. A lot of the Tomahawk missiles will eventually get through, and they may strike civilian areas. But also, Syrian missiles may strike American ships. And if Hezbollah opens up the guns on the Israelis, and Iran opens up on Saudi Arabia, and I don't know what else is going to happen, we're talking about conflagration. We're not talking about a limited kind of battle as Obama is trying to sell, or McCain is trying to sell, or Kerry, that other idiot. The fact of the matter is talking about regional conflagration that could get much worse than what we think. My feeling is that the Syrians will do well, acquit themselves quite well in any war with the United States, but we are still the United States of America. We're still a superpower, so we have to take that into consideration too.
In any boots on the ground type battle, you now have a Syrian army that's kind of forged in the fields of battle and battle hardened now, which is the same thing that happened in Lebanon with Hezbollah when Israel tried to attack them last time.
Well, John McCain said if any boots are on the ground, that Mr. Obama must be impeached. I can guarantee you there are boots on the ground right now. We have American Special Forces operatives both in northern Syria and in southern Syria. So if any of them ever get captured or killed, what's McCain going to do then?
Hey, Ziad.
Yes.
I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist at times, and so I'll admit that looking at this, as I said, the whole media presentation of this war, the whole way it's played out so far in the last month or something, has made no sense as I see it, if I wanted to successfully win a war. And so I'm just wondering, and we can't know, but I'm just wondering if, let's say you were in the system somehow, like anybody, it could be Dempsey, it could be anybody in the CIA or whatever, and you simply can't deter the Saudis or whoever else, the Israelis. They're not stoppable. They simply have to go on and on with this war, right?
Right.
And they will assassinate to do it, and they will bribe to do it, right? They again, the Saudis will spend $50 or $100 billion. They don't care. The Israelis, the fanatical Israeli types are fanatical. So let me just finish. If I were in the American side trying to stop this, to be honest, one way to stop it would be to have Obama go out on a limb, expose the fact that it's stupid, insane, and risky, send 100 Tomahawks or 200, have most of them shot down, a certain amount of damage, and then if the Syrians could sink a boat or two, just say, we've got to impeach or force Obama to resign. This is a bad idea. Now the Russians are moving in more, and this was an unpopular idea to begin with. He did it without congressional approval, and then put the blame in the fall on Obama. And at that point, I think it would be hard for the Saudis or Israelis to, get any help from America.
Yeah, we could certainly tie ourselves up with some new scandal, yeah, like a Nixon type scandal, and we don't need time to fight your lousy wars. Yeah, I can see that.
Well, Ziad, maybe it's just because I'm from D.C. originally, and when everything you hear and see at the dinner table your whole life is about the conniving scheming of these people, it gives you a jaded view of the world. Let's just put it that way.
I've heard a similar conspiracy theory, quite similar, from some Arabic people who believe that Putin and Obama are going to agree that the U.S. will save face by firing Tomahawks into areas which are unpopulated, have some of their missiles shot down. The Syrians will fire a Yakhant missile deliberately, askance or something, so it won't hit any American ships. And then everybody will agree that this is a really bad thing, and Obama will get what he wants, and so will Putin. I've heard that also. Now, I don't think it's going to work out that way. I think Obama's not his own man. So we're in the grip of a conspiracy being manipulated by bankers and huge interests around the world.
Well, anyway, it's a global fight. It's not simply a question of some people might think this is a way to smash Hezbollah, or this is just about a pipeline. Actually, with the pipeline is only one part of it. As you said, there's gas all over. Cyprus, Syria, Lebanon, Israel. The rumors, that off of North Africa, there are massive gas fields.
Yeah, but not like this one. Apparently the Turks and the
sure.
French got their eyes on it. Yeah.
Of course. It's also easier to get to Turkey and to Europe.
Look, here's the bottom line. The Europeans, for sure, like the big industries like Germany, England, and France, don't want to be just under the thumb of the Russians and another, Eastern, power like Syria, where all their gas and the energy is coming from the East. The U.S. is frightened of that because they will lose influence with their own allies in Europe when they become basically dependent upon the Russian Gazprom monopoly and this new source off the coast. That plays a part also. That's why the French are so anxious to move in there. But of course, Dr. Assad prevents that from happening.
There's another angle to all this too, and it's got to do with apocalyptic prophecies, and you got the Zionist nutballs, both Christians and the Jewish ones. I think they believe that Damascus is supposed to be obliterated or something to bring on the Messiah.
Yeah, well, don't hold your breath.
Well, you also have, I guess, the Islamic, waiting for the Mahdi, or for that matter, Dajjal. You have. I guess, Ziad, what Oolong is trying to point out here is, in that part of the world, you have, I think, a higher than average percentage of religious lunatics.
Yeah, I said that early on when we were talking. I said, got to remember, Saudi Arabia is not just economics; they are a theological country, a theocracy, just like Iran. And you have people who believe exactly what you're saying. Yes, I agree.
And they're destroying all kinds of very, very old and important Islamic places.
Beyond Islamic, they are many of the beautiful, priceless artifacts we have in Syria are being stolen, as they are being stolen also in Iraq. These are the fountainheads, the sources of Western civilization, Eastern civilization, being just simply robbed and sold on the open market. It's unbelievable. It's just painful to watch.
Well, I guess I might move on to the question of what do you think would happen in a war? Do you have really any? You have a lot of sources in Syria. Like maybe with the government or other people. Do you think if they pick some number, 200 Tomahawks, do you think that the Syrian Hezbollah, whatever side, would retaliate?
Yes.
I think they have to be honest.
Based on what I heard, the official statements of the Syrian government, statements by Hezbollah representatives, the fact that firing 200 Tomahawks is such a massive endeavor that the Syrian government would lose face before the Syrian people at a time of great stress if Syria did not respond. I think the Russians will probably push them to respond and use their Yakhont missiles. I think Putin is really miffed. I think when Bandar bin Sultan went there to Moscow to meet him and offer him that ridiculous 15 billion for Russian weapons, he knew exactly what Bandar wanted. And here's a head of Saudi Arabian intelligence, basically an ape, talking to the man who once headed the KGB in Eastern Europe, who was the top man over Marcus Wolf of the Stasi. Putin is the ultimate Spionmeister. I mean, he is a master spy talking to basically what is an orangutan, and then have that orangutan come and offer him money, 15 billion, a pittance essentially. I think he was really upset, and he felt that he was being insulted. And I think that Putin is going to translate that into something of a position, as we're seeing with three new destroyers coming into the Mediterranean now, the Moskva, the big intelligence ship they have, and talk now about the Admiral Kuznetsov, debarking and entering the Mediterranean once again at the end of this year. I think the Russians are intent on creating a presence. And
I think what probably really pissed them off more than anything was when the Saudis said they guaranteed there wouldn't be any terrorist attacks at the Sochi Olympics.
At that moment, if you remember the Lubyanka prison under Stalin, at that moment, Putin should have arrested them because he is obviously admitting to all these terrorist crimes committed by these Chechen maniacs, and he should have arrested him right there and then tossed his butt right into the Lubyanka prison, in my humble opinion.
And in a perfect world, I think he would have.
Well, he probably has
Yes.
diplomatic immunity.
Well, it's not just that, Ziad. Let's face it. The point is they want to know all sides are probing everybody. This whole thing with the chemical weapons and whatever may just have been a bluff, Let's hope it was. We don't know. But the Omani representative went to Iran, supposedly, and offered to bribe them for selling Syria down the river.
Yes. The Iranians, of course, have a different strategy altogether and has nothing to do
Well,
with
the point is they can't because it's an existential issue.
Exactly.
Syria, Hezbollah, and Iran can't sell Syria out because, as we said earlier, it's the fulcrum. And they would be smashed. I mean, look, if Iran agreed to do what Syria was doing with John Kerry, meeting him all those years,
Yes.
you know what would happen. In 3 years, you'd have the same thing happen that has been happening to Syria because it's just a tactic. It's an implementation strategy of their dictatorial agenda. They want a clean break, Ziad. You know that. The Yan'an plan, the clean break. Break all of those countries into 5 pieces.
If you read Al Alam, which is Iran's Arabic language media, and you read Syrian media and watch television, you find that that's a belief that's very commonly held now in those countries, that Syria is just the beginning. It's the preparation for the attack on Iran. And the Iranians, being aware of that, and probably the Russians too, are not going to allow it to happen. So there's going to be a lot of stubbornness here and not a lot of give.
Well, okay, let's follow up then. Let's say America sends 100 or 200 Tomahawks. Let's say half of them get through for the sake of the argument. And then Hezbollah and Syria make some kind of response. I am assuming that you would attack Israel's military bases or something. Is that a fair?
Yes, Syria and Hezbollah both have threatened to do that. But I think Syria will also respond to the source of these Tomahawks. There will be firing on American battleships.
Well, make sure to hit that British spy facility on Cyprus. That's like one of the most important on Earth. That real estate is one of the most valuable pieces of on Earth because of that spy facility.
The British base at Akrotiri would be a beautiful site to really vaporize. The only problem is, since Britain supposedly is not taking part in all these shenanigans, that an attack on Britain in a peaceful mode might trigger the NATO treaty. So maybe the Syrians will not fire any of their, Iskander missiles at it. I would think that as long as Britain stayed honest. My information, though, if you read my blog, there was one of my readers in Australia was listening in on a conversation between 2 individuals, one of whom was, in fact, a SAS operative, who said that his buddy in Turkey, in Sirlik, was getting ready to go into Syria. This is after the vote in the parliament. Now, how credible that is, I do not know. But I wouldn't put it past Cameron to go bypass the parliament anyway. And if he does, at that point in time, I think Akrotiri is fair game.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, though, there's a saying, the lie is different at every level.
Yeah.
And a special forces guy is really at the bottom. And so the lie he gets is like 7 lies away from the truth. So
I'm just reporting to you what I heard. Don't.
Yeah, sure. No, it's relevant. I'm just trying to say that even if special forces got sent in, they've probably already been in countless times.
Yes.
Leading the charge in different places, and according to your blog, at different times you've essentially caught different, French or the MIT guys from Turkey or so on and so forth.
They've caught MIT guys from Turkey just recently. They've caught French operatives. The Syrians are pretty good at keeping the whole issue kind of mum. They know it's embarrassing, and they'd rather just negotiate. But yeah, they're catching some real odd characters in Syria right now. Yes.
Well, unfortunately, the new head of the DGSE, which is French intelligence, was the French ambassador to Israel and is a real Zionist fan. So that you're not going to get an easier situation with France anytime soon.
I agree with that, and I think that crazy, Hollande's popularity is, or lack thereof, is like down. I've never been lower for any president in history of France or modern France. This guy is pushing for something that he knows fully well is going to probably make him, just like Obama, put him down at the bottom of the barrel. And yet they persist in it. What is it? Is it money? Is it the promise? Is it Dr. Faust's, deal devil? I don't know.
I think they've got dirt on all of them, and it's basically, if you don't go along with the Zionist agenda, they're going to release a videotape of him with a child, or some disgusting black secret they've got somewhere.
With Francois Hollande, though, he already fathered 4 bastards with that Ségolène Royal. I mean, he can't be any worse than that. Had he suggested they were legitimate, and then it turned out they were not, I think that he probably could be outed. But the guy openly is a father of 4 bastards from the same woman. So I don't know what else you can find about Hollande other than he's the French connection or something.
I'm sure they've got even worse things they've done than that. That's probably the iceberg.
That's the public story. That's nothing. What you just said, that doesn't cause any problems for him in France.
Not in France, no.
No, the videos with the young boys in Bangkok are probably a lot worse. But anyway, I mean, come on, you don't get to the top unless they've got something on you. That's the problem with the political world in the West. But we shall see about that. But so you think it's likely that there would be a retaliation of some sort. Do you think that Israel would then use that as a justification to escalate the war?
Well, sure. If Hezbollah does what it says it's going to do, that if Syria is struck by the United States, it will unleash a torrent of missiles on Israel, the answer is yes. We're talking about, again, not a limited war as Obama's promising, but a conflagration, a regional conflagration. How it will turn out at the end when the dust settles, I don't know. I'm not an odds maker.
Well, I can say one thing. I do not think Israel or Obama should do things to anger Putin.
Yeah, he's a real...
That would not be a wise move. Saakashvili did that in Georgia. That is just not a wise move. He was kind and didn't nail him to the wall, but...
Well, that's called the mouse that roared.
Eating his tie worked well for him, but... No, but seriously, though, I mean... you look at this and you just sit there and say, Israel should be very careful in this. They may think they've got winning cards, but that's a very questionable assumption because Russia is a high-tech powerhouse too.
Yes, and the other thing too about Israel is that the plan right now that Iran is going to implement eventually to liberate Palestine is a pretty good plan, and it's very similar to what they're doing to Syria. The infiltration of large groups of terrorists, essentially, or commandos, to disrupt infrastructure. Israel can't take that the way Syria can. Israel has many, many more high-quality targets than Syria has. So it'll be interesting to see if this goes that far, whether we're looking at the very end of the Zionist entity, essentially.
Didn't Kissinger mention not that long ago that Israel's got maybe 10 years left or something?
I don't know. That's an interesting thing. If he really did, it's quite perceptive on his part and honest.
Yeah, he said that, but it might have been a threat, right? It might have been a threat to the Israelis that they better do what the big boys in the West want.
That's very possible. I don't recall hearing him saying that at all.
Well, it was on the front page of the New York Post, as I recall. Oolong, do you remember?
Well, I
don't remember where it was, but
New York Post.
you're missing mine.
I really much more discriminating.
Well,
would watch Free Press, but not allowed to watch it anymore.
So if you want to send me a copy of the New York Times crossword puzzle, I will do that. I won't read the New York Times.
I can relate. I can seriously relate.
Sure.
But so I guess we're still stuck with the position that we don't know to what extent what Obama has been doing is a bluff and to what extent he actually will do. Because, the other thing with what he's doing is essentially you could have enough pressure come up to say they're going to stop him. And they won't go through with it.
If the House of Representatives votes solidly against him, he'll have an excuse to walk away with face. He can say, "I gave."
And they're going to vote against it. The current count is so dramatically one-sided. I don't,
But
I mean,
a full court press going on right now to push some of these younger people towards voting for it. I think that they're paying more attention to the polls. You might be right, and I hope you are right. I really don't want to see this happen.
Well, not too many of us do. This could bring down, besides being a big war, it could bring down the world economy.
Yes.
Because again, as I mentioned, from China's point of view, this is not. I mean, they were unhappy with this whole destabilization campaign, but that's different. This just means the U.S. does what it wants around the world with missiles. That's a dramatically different.
There's no question. The BRICS nations, China, Russia, Brazil, they're not going to let the United States do that anymore. There's an attitude now that we are important, that we're industrial powerhouses, and you're not going to have this imperialist, colonialist atmosphere any longer. The Chinese are very much on board on this issue. They just sent I heard this, I'm not confirmed. The Chinese have also sent now warships to the Mediterranean.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. Yeah.
We have to watch that very carefully. I mean, that's a big message from the Chinese. They normally are not known to send they don't extend their power or project it to the Mediterranean. So interesting.
Alan, you had a question.
Yes. Well, one thing I've been wondering about with this whole thing is I've noticed it's taking a very long time. And I'm wondering if the delaying is to keep it going for a long time, to distract people from what's happening economically. I've been following some of the financial blogs, and things are not going very well, and things could really fall apart, even without the war, with all of the criminal activity of the banksters. So I guess I'm just wondering if this and all of the funny on now, off again kinds of things are deliberate. If Obama is simply playing the fool because they told him to play the fool. Just a thought.
I think that's very interesting. That he's in fact the patsy. He's the buffoon, the fool, the king's fool. Yeah, I think it's coming out that way. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're very serious things. I mean, the finances could fall apart at any time. I mean, these people have stolen so much from so many people in this country and all over the world, and they can't do it anymore. They've just run out of their fiat currency, and they know it, and they don't want to be caught. So,
but Alan, there's the theory that they really the Western banker criminals, the banksters at the top, really need a big war to distract everybody at some point, because right,
yeah.
Because then you can blame it on China selling all their dollars, right?
Yeah,
or something like that. And yes, of course, Obama would take the fall, right? I mean, he could even be arrested conceivably. I mean, what he's doing is so insanely bad at some point. But the thing, I mean, it's totally criminal. But I mean, it's also not just criminal, Ziad. It's unserious.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's not being done in a professional, respectable way. I mean, you can respect somebody you don't like the head of the KGB or something. You can just say, look, he's following his country's interests or whatever, right? But what
Yeah.
Obama is doing is not following his country's interest. It's not even following a coherent way. I mean, you just
These
don't
people
go
are
to
in
the G20 an hour late. You just don't do it. That's
no,
not
these people
that's
are an
not serious.
embarrassment. They're an embarrassment, really.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
But what if
So
you had stocks in an oil company and you expect that the price of the barrel of oil is going to go up five times present value, and you want to make a lot of money? I mean, imagine supply and demand with the Straits of Hormuz closed off. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made when people are desperate. Sure, it's
Right.
a part of it
And
too.
Ziad, though, here's the thing. That's why for China, this is an incredibly serious matter. Not just that the U.S. wants to bomb North Korea in a few years. It's that their economy will come to its knees if oil goes up 4 or 5 times. And they already have a mediocre economy, and they have lots of riots and demonstrations and whatever that aren't covered very much in the Western news.
Right.
They're talking about stability. Their internal stability would be seriously compromised if oil prices tripled. There's just no question about that. So I'm
Absolutely.
just trying to say this is a very, very serious deal with that. And so the banksters, they may need a bigger crisis to cover their crimes, I think is what Alan is saying.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it certainly looks like that is a possibility, but I'm just saying I think that Russia, China, Brazil, other countries leaning on, for example, Europe. NATO is not totally an American thing. The military power is largely American, but I'm still going to say the European control of the United States is fairly substantial. I don't think it's a given that China, Russia, and others can't put a hell of a lot of pressure on the U.S. I just think they really seriously can.
Just quickly
And
too, that we're talking about Iran. This might be the best thing that ever happened to Iran. Imagine if the price of oil goes up because the Straits of Hormuz are closed, or there's some event that takes place there. Iranian oil, which can be shipped away from the Persian Gulf, becomes very valuable to the Chinese. Suddenly, the Iranians have the Chinese as allies. They can now go ahead with their nuclear program without fear. It may be a strategy of the Iranians too, to have this situation take place. Be interesting to see how that plays
well, I
out.
think for those of us who, as kids, enjoyed war games and games of strategy, chess and such,
Sure.
this is really a very fascinating situation. I mean, I'm truly sad for the victims of this, but
Cool.
it is, from a geostrategic point of view, this is an amazingly complex mosaic of interests and strategies.
Well, President Assad said that. Remember that interview he had with both Russian TV and I think also with not the BBC but another English channel. He said that we are at the fault lines of everything. That when you want to you want to shoot at Syria or cause problems in Syria, you must expect the ripples to just overwhelm you. He's right. This is it.
Well, this is, again, that's what I think we're watching, but it does raise questions. So many, hundreds of questions. One is, as I said, why didn't, let's say, Iran try to destabilize Saudi Arabia or something? I mean, there's just so many issues going on here because Iran has been under siege for a long time. There's all these assassinations and attempted bombings of things.
Iran has a lot of contacts with the Shiites, who are mostly laborers in the eastern part of Arabia and the Dhahran oil fields and elsewhere. There's no question that when the time comes and there's a sense among Shiites that they're being attacked, that the Iranians can rely on the hundreds of thousands of Shiite workers, the families in eastern Arabia. That's a problem for the Saudis. They are very concerned about this. Bahrain is one example of how that sort of thing can explode. The Iranians so far, for reasons of their own, have not been pushing it. But they haven't. It's not like they've been pro-Sunni or pro-Saudi. No, they have not been pushing unrest. Maybe they feel it might spread to them also. But the fact of the matter is they have a lot of contacts in these areas, Bahrain and Arabia, and it could blow up too.
Maybe this is too far left field, but how do you feel Egypt plays into all this?
I don't view Egypt right now as anything but a remnant of the Arab Spring. It's trying to get its act together. It's trying to control itself to make up for an embarrassing event, which is overthrow of a democratically elected government. Let's face it. Even though I don't like the Muslim Brotherhood. They were elected in a democratic process. People said it was transparent and of integrity. So Egypt right now economically is a basket case, no force there, and militarily speaking, I don't think they have the will or desire to get involved in anybody else's problems. I see Egypt as a potential power coming up down the road, not yet.
Well, Oolong, I would say I've got relatives in Egypt. I'm actually more familiar with Egypt by far than Syria, and I would say that the Muslim Brotherhood were essentially delivered into the presidency. That was they were made to win. That was what America wanted, or perhaps, I don't know, maybe Israel wanted as well. And I think they intentionally mismanaged things. And then, Ziad, you're familiar that Morsi talked about helping the jihad, in Syria.
Yes.
And then in the Sinai, they just let the security collapse to the point where Israel was going to have to invade soon. And so I think the public in Egypt is overwhelmingly in favor of the military coup that took place.
Let me tell you why Egypt is similar to Palestine in Gaza, especially. The reason why Hamas won the elections, which of course brought out all the hypocrisy in the West, was because Palestinians had grown tired of corruption. And they felt that even though Hamas was a religious, theocratic group, that it was better to have honest leadership than corrupt leadership. The same happened in Egypt. Egyptians are like Palestinians. By and large, the majority tend to be not all that religious. The majority tend to be more secular. But they elected Muslim Brotherhood because I think they felt that there would be honest government. As it turned out, they got honest government, but incompetent government, even worse than the one before. And that's what caused this entire mess. And, ask yourself this question. Who pushed the Egyptian military to overthrow the Muslim Brotherhood too? Who was behind
It's a very good question. But my take is, and what I've heard from my relatives is essentially they hated Mubarak, but Morsi is far worse. So the question is, what do you do?
That's what Hamas is all about.
And Ziad, in that part of the world, as you know, there aren't as many institutions as there are in the West that could, I guess what you would say is challenge things. There was only the army left, right? In other words, if you have a president like Morsi who's on a suicidal, kamikaze approach, like let's say we've got Obama, right? Okay, what do you do? Well, over there is no alternative to the military stepping in. And I'm not saying this is good, desirable, or will even have a favorable outcome in the long run. I'm just saying that a lot of poor people made the choice to go with the Muslim Brotherhood, but I do think the West wanted it as a destabilization tactic. And I think they would have been very happy if they could have gotten Egyptian resources into something like fighting Syria.
Yes.
Don't think it was practical, but I think that maybe Morsi, being kind of crazy, thought he could go for it. But as far as what led to the coup, I think, one of the reasons is Saudi Arabia kicked up and said, look, we're handling everything. Put Qatar to bed, and we're doing this our way. And our way is you get rid of the Muslim Brotherhood everywhere, and we fund at whatever it takes. We fund Egypt, we fund more training in Jordan, and we go talk to our buddies, the Bush family, about what false flags the CIA can come up with.
Don't forget, too, in Egypt that what Erdogan did in Turkey was he very slowly and very cleverly denuded the Turkish military, stripped it of all its major officers, out of fear that they would eventually do what the Turkish military has done so many times, is overthrow his government because it was not secular enough. In Egypt, Morsi was heading that direction also, and I think the General Sisi saw through that. The Egyptian military, if you have relatives in Egypt, they will tell you one thing. The Egyptian military is like the Pakistani military. It is an institution that is both military and economic. There's massive.
It's dominant.
It is dominant.
It's the dominant economic force in Egypt.
So the moment you start playing games with the military, trying somehow to strip it of its power, you're also inviting exactly what General Sisi did. That might be also a factor to consider.
I think Morsi plucked a lot of the top brass in the Egyptian military and got rid of them. And I believe he even appointed El-Sisi himself, did he not, to the top tier?
Yes, but El-Sisi is a typical Egyptian officer, and he's beholden to General Tantawi anyway. I don't think Tantawi ever left the military, even though he was forced into retirement. I think the whole issue was they smelled a rat. And when the Egyptian military smelled that somebody's going to start playing around with their interests, they moved in for the kill. And I think that's what might happen in Turkey, although most of the good officers they have in the Turkish army now are in prison. That's really the bad part about. I would love to see a military coup in Turkey because Erdogan really should go. But
I guess the thing about Egypt though is, so they got rid of Mubarak, but I mean, the Egyptian army has always been beholden to the United States, so it seems to me they're right back at square one.
Not beholden. Again, remember the Egyptian army, and I think the plane will tell you this, is that they like the $3 billion a year they're getting in arms. Military men are just the way they are. But once it comes to the plantation, the entire plantation, they get very jealous of it. I think that General Tantawi was removed in a very humiliating way by a man the military thought was really a nobody, a Muslim Brotherhood guy. And they decided that probably it's the best for the military to bring. And look, by the way, what happened to Mubarak. He's on the verge of being released. I mean, Egyptian...
Also, hey, Oolong, I think you got to stop a second. When people talk about like $3 billion of military aid from the U.S., or then maybe this will be replaced by $3 billion from the Saudis or something.
The Ruskies.
Look, China can make it 10, okay? And it won't cause any sweat. They could come over there and say, you know what, Egypt is that important. It's got the population, the military, the location, the Suez Canal, right? China can just say, you're threatening to ruin the world economy and destroy us with all this crap, okay? What can we get for $10 billion, right? And the answer is $3 billion worth of rusting or whatever American, military parts. That won't cut it.
And playing.
I don't.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Ziad.
No, just the Russian bears swimming in the Mediterranean too, by the way, just dying to get in there. So for $3 billion in the United States, the Russians would love to move in there with their new jets and everything else.
Right, and the point is that China, that would be part of the deal with China. China would provide the money, but then some of the muscle would come from Russia.
Yes.
And Egypt has this card. And not only that, the military in Egypt is very, very suspicious of this whole Arab Spring, Muslim Brotherhood, clean break kind of stuff. Because let's not forget, they're part of it. They're part of the clean break. Israel wants up to the Nile, right? They want the Sinai. So I'm just trying to say, look, I know the $3 billion sounds like a lot, but in today's world where there are trillions and trillions of dollars flooding all over the place, $3 billion is not the same as it was, 30 years ago.
I really agree with you on that. 100%.
One thing you just said is, I guess that sort of brings Greater Israel or Ersatz Israel into the equation. How do you guys think that plays into what's going on in Syria?
Well, the Israelis certainly don't want Egypt to go back to a Nasserist Egypt, a nationalist Egypt. They would do anything to stop that. What they can do in Egypt is something that we can all debate. But certainly the Israelis will be doing their very best to ensure that Egypt remains somehow problem-laden, so it does not get back into the old groove. Egypt is a natural leader in the Arab world, and they would not want that to go back to a Nasserist Egypt. As of right now, Egypt is not playing a big role in anything.
But I think with your question, with the Eretz Israel question, is just my take, and Ziad, we'll hear your take. My take is that the Greater Israel thing is kind of like almost a religious doctrine. It's to give you something to strive towards, and then the people controlling it get the profits along the way and the power along the way.
Yeah,
So in other words, that you've got different kinds of fundamentalists in that part of the world. You've got religious Wahhabi lunatics. You've got people who want to see the Messiah of some form come tomorrow or whatever. And one of the kind of millennialist kind of religious fundamentalism is this desire that a greater Israel is what God has demanded, right? And I think those guys at the bottom are kind of the suckers, if you don't mind my putting it that way, whereas the people who are controlling it are political evil operatives. And so I see it as kind of like a somewhat religious, somewhat secular, crazed movement. Ziad, how would you look at it?
I see it historically as a belief in some miraculous deistic promise, and from the Nile to the Euphrates, but it's also preposterous too. And I think most Israelis know that. I don't think the Israelis necessarily want to even expand that much. If that's you're talking about Eretz Israel as the classic idea, because they have to absorb all those Arabs, those horrible Arabs, and will just destroy them. In fact, they're trying right now to dump as many Palestinians as they can outside, because they're finding Palestinians with their Levantine attitudes and everything else to be, contrary to their European style and tradition. So, yeah, this Eretz Israel thing is really a thing of the past. I don't see it as being very important. However, control, influence, and power extended out of Israel, what it is today, across the borders is something else. So Eretz Israel is a geographic concept, is dead, but the concept of Zionist power is something that's very much alive.
Well, we can see the Sinai and the Suez Canal as being kind of in the crosshairs, so to speak.
They did that before. They gave it up because their supply lines were too long in '73. It was a disaster, even though they won the war against the Egyptians. But as long as Egypt was happy with the little Abu Rais oil fields and the Egyptians were signed up on the Camp David Accords, they felt that was okay for them. They could then play against the Syrians and the Lebanese. Much better, territory for them. But now even that's, I think, become problematic. The idea of expanding into what? Into populations that despise you. I don't think that's. I don't think it's possible. I don't see it as realistic. What I see as realistic is a big bloody war that's going to be fought because Obama has decided to send some frigates of his to the Eastern Mediterranean. That's more problematic.
Do you think that, Ziad, the Iranians and the Syrians, or maybe the Lebanese or whoever, would put missiles on ships at different places, like fishing vessels or whatever?
Oh, Syria has ships which carry Yachot missiles. It's a problem in the United States. The Russians have provided Syria with seaborne missiles. Other things, of course, all those things are possible. Everybody's always thinking about new ways to hurt the other person. Sure, I mean it's quite possible. But I think the biggest problem we have is missiles, as you said earlier. Somebody said earlier, it's a missile world now. Boats floating, are just targets.
Well, that's certainly what it looks like, and that's one of the reasons to me this seems kind of illogical. I mean, the U.S. putting a bunch of boats off the coast of Egypt. The only logic I see in that is to try to intimidate Egypt. I don't see it. I mean, that's too close to Syria. What are you going to do? What's the point?
The whole area is close there. I mean, you can't do anything in the Eastern Mediterranean without being close to somebody. I mean, you're within range of somebody. If you float off Cyprus, they'll think you're going to bomb Syria or Egypt. And it's just the way it is in the area. Just the hope we have is that, and I don't have much faith in Obama or the idiots we have right now in Washington. The hope is that people can be spared, the kind of misery, the horrific, scenes that we get from bombs exploding in civilian areas. That's what's going to happen, sadly.
I have one other question about this. If indeed a war comes out, do you think there's anything from left field, so to speak, that might be a tactic? I mean, in a sense, this whole chemical weapons thing was a bit of a surprise. But what about like an Israeli invasion of Lebanon or something? Is there any kind of...
If Hezbollah fires those missiles at Israel, you can expect a land war in Lebanon. That's expected. However, a land war in Lebanon, remember 2006, was not successful back then. If the Israelis think it'll be more successful today with a new defense minister, that's their business. We're talking about more mess, more destruction, more suffering. I just hope that Obama's people are telling him things like that.
Yeah, but Ziad, I'm out of the States and I don't watch that American media. I don't read the New York Post, so to speak. And when I see it, I saw on YouTube Obama speaking, and he sounded very scared to me. I think he was told what to say, and he might have been told what would happen if he didn't say it right.
We picked the wrong people to advise him. That moron at the United Nations, like that Susan Rice.
Susan Rice?
As bad as you can get. If she's advising him, I can see why he'd be afraid to say anything. I think he is afraid about his legacy. I think most of these presidents, whether it's Clinton, Nixon, are always worried about the legacy. How will I be remembered? I'm the first African-American president. Will I be remembered as an idiot or somebody who tried hard or made good decisions? Here, he's now facing his biggest test, and it looks ugly. And maybe he's worried right now that the Russians will make it ugly for him because we don't want World War III here.
Maybe.
Sorry.
I was just going to say maybe he'll find a way to make peace because, he is the peacemaker with that Nobel Peace Prize.
But I think you ought to cough it back up.
He never should have got it in the first place.
You can explain to your children why he got it. We try your best to invent. It's ridiculous. But we're looking right now at the abyss. If this goes the wrong way, and I think Putin is serious, he's not going to give up on Syria, and we're looking at a potential clash of titans, the worst kind imaginable. And maybe somebody out there will have some sense. Maybe somebody like that movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, Klaatu will come back and all our clocks and our elevators will stop, and Gort will blow up all the refineries and everything else. It'll be fine. Klaatu Parada Nikto, remember that?
Well, I keep waiting for that Deus Ex Machina, but I haven't seen it in my lifetime. God still hasn't come down and rescued us. Yes, Oolong?
I always say things about all matters theological. Don't hold your breath.
I was just going to say, the thing I find interesting is Putin doesn't say a whole lot, but when he does talk, I don't think he's bluffing.
This guy was KGB. He knows how to lie when he has to. He knows the extent how far a lie will fly. You accept that kind of expression. He's very smart. And I think you're right. When he says something that he intends to do, he's the one who he intends to do it. And you got to be very careful with him.
Well, I also think the U.S. is in an awkward position because I don't think the military wants or believes in this, the U.S. military. So
Dempsey does not want this war. He does not want this. There's no question about it in my mind.
So, in any kind of fight, the fighting spirit of the competitors is vitally important. And even in the case of, let's say, Israeli pilots or something, the Israeli Air Force or something, they'll do their jobs, but still, morale is very important. Let's give your example of an Israeli land invasion of Lebanon, right?
Right.
If it's seen as being somewhat contrived for no clear purpose, or it's just because the people at the top profit from big wars, what's your morale? I've heard that the Israeli military has truly horrible morale nowadays compared to, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be like this for Zionism. Everybody's supposed to accept them. They become a part of the area, and everything's really cool. And soldiers, this new generation of Israelis, they're looking around going, like probably American kids, what are we being sent to war for? It's a different attitude. It's not the original founding people, the Zionists from Poland or Russia who are fleeing anti-Semitism. They don't think like that. And I think you're right. I've heard also reports that morale in the Israeli armed forces is really bad.
I've seen on conservative locations in the U.S., like, let's say, the Drudge Report or something, basically, a lot of conservatives are saying, do you want to be the Air Force for Al-Qaeda? right? And then it's not even like there's a strategy that makes sense. Like, I mean, it may be morally questionable or evil or something, but at least trying to overthrow Assad and get the military to take over and be more pro-U.S. was a rational strategy in the early days, right? You could understand why, and if you were a military man in the U.S., you could say, okay, I understand what we're trying to do, but now you're saying, let's, create huge zones in the world that are run by Al-Qaeda, and they'll have massive chemical weapons to play with, and perhaps very good missiles. Missiles good enough to take out Israel or good enough to take out Turkey, which is a NATO member. Now think about that. What is the rationale? It's one thing to say, I'd like to replace one military guy or one, in the case of Assad, I guess you would say the son of a military guy with, some general who's disaffected or something, that kind of thing. But it's totally different. It's totally insane from a U.S. military point of view to want to see Al-Qaeda lunatics with massive resources and dangerous supplies and such.
I think the American people picked up on that. I think that alternative news sources like yourselves who reveal this have really caught on with people. They know that the ones fighting Assad, no matter how autocratic he may be or how unpleasant he's portrayed in the Western media, they know that at least he's secular and that the ones we're supporting are maniacs. That's a problem for the Obama administration to sell this idiot's errand to the American people.
Well, I think you see that with, I mean, you may not follow it, but the more conservative and Christian type organizations in the U.S. are getting more and more up in arms. I mean, it's like U.S. policy leads to the death and destruction of Christian communities in that part of the world, and probably Jewish communities as well.
I think that the push towards greater theocracy in the Middle East is anti-American, it's un-American, and the American people won't tolerate it. And I hope you're right about the House of Representatives. I think that if they blow this whole thing up, maybe we can walk away with some dignity and stop supporting reactionary troglodytes. It's horrible, embarrassing. That's all I can say. The conclusion is we're really on the very edge of the abyss. We can either stand here or we can fall into it. And I think Obama right now would prefer not to fall, but maybe he, like you said, and maybe you're all right, he's not his own man. He's being manipulated.
Well, maybe this is a test. It's a test of all of us. Alan, you had a question.
Yes. I think a lot of Americans are really fed up with all of this. And you mentioned the alternate media, and I think that has played a great role in helping people to become really informed about what's going on, the plain truth, so to speak. Now you live here in America, Ziad, and what advice or recommendations would you make to other Americans in terms of stopping this madness?
Stop watching sports all the time.
I like basketball, and I'm going to watch that a little bit, but that's about it.
I said stop watching sports all the time. I mean, we have in this country that people kind of get blindsided sometimes by events. They're watching the Super Bowl, they're watching their favorite, the Tiger. We have the Tigers here. You guys in D.C., you got the Senators. I think maybe I'm old-fashioned, but the thing is that people are too distracted by frivolities. Just pay attention to world events a little bit, and you'll be able to figure things out. And maybe that's happening. Maybe that's why so many Americans in poll after poll are demonstrating an incredible resilience. That we're not going to be snookered anymore. We're going to stand up for our rights. I like that.
Turn off the mainstream media too.
I don't even watch it anymore. So embarrassing.
No, I don't either.
It turns my stomach.
New York Times is Danny the Syrian on CNN is an unbelievable embarrassment. He might be coming back too.
Well, Ziad, they're making more and more fake videos. I mean, like in the Libyan war, they had, these scenes, and they're like made in Hollywood sets in Qatar, and then they show pictures of demonstrations from India, and they switch the Indian flags with,
For the Syrians, they
the
used
Libyan.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
For the Libyans, and then they say this kid was murdered by Assad, and it's the same kid who's been murdered 5 times in Palestine,
And then they have
and Egypt and
yeah.
wherever, and it's like it's stock footage for the CNN types.
When the Syrian was caught, Syrian intelligence service got a hold of his tape, and then went viral. So that you had what's his name, Anderson Cooper, was asking him on TV about 2 years ago. He goes, Danny, how do you think they got a hold of that tape? Well, the tape showed him directing a whole production team and a scene from Syria, telling him, okay, now put up the sound. I want to hear some bombing. Like film Twickenham Studios or some studio in London. It was Shepperton Studios. And it was so embarrassing that Anderson Cooper's career survived that horrific humiliation is testament to what H.L. Mencken once said, that the great American essayist, that nobody ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the American public. That guy's career should have been just kiboshed right there.
Yeah, but he's a Vanderbilt from the CIA. Worked for the CIA.
He's a bit.
So he's working for the CIA news network. So that's why he's a Vanderbilt. But
he's got the durability. Yeah.
But the point is, the Hollywood type special effects have been really rolled out, and that was one of the ways they were hoping to overthrow the Syrian government, is knock out the electronic systems, TV and everything, and then just broadcast around the world that some different general had taken over, or what? In other words, to totally throw the country into a state of confusion.
You're absolutely right. In fact, we were ready for that. That was broadcast on Syrian television numerous times, warning listeners that there was a plan out of Qatar to hijack broadcasting services and announce the overthrow of President Assad. And luckily, it didn't happen, and people were ready for it anyway. They're not going to believe it. But interesting you brought that up. That's true.
Maybe we need it here in the U.S., right? Well, maybe the Russians or Chinese can help us to. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean. If people could wake up from the trance, so to speak, because Alan, you asked about what can people do. I mean, in a sense, it's breaking the trance as much as anything. They're really. It's not just TV. It's the schools. It's Ziad. It's the legal system. I mean, it's all kind of a. I'm just doing my job. This is what the paper requires. The police are now really mindless beyond belief.
But people are waking up, and I think that is the good news, and that is how these criminals are going to be defeated.
I agree. I think it's wonderful that people are actually finding alternative sources of information and they're following up on them. It's just unbelievable. I just am so optimistic about that. Now, guys, I have a wedding I got to go to.
Yes, we understand. It's getting late, so I think it's about time. Any last thoughts, Oolong, Alan?
This was great. I think this is going to help a lot of people to understand a whole lot about what's going on in the Middle East.
I just wanted to say thanks for taking the time to be with us. I know you have another engagement, so
you are very gracious to have me. I really appreciate this.
Well, we appreciate it, Ziad. We really do.
I'd love to be on this again sometime if some other subject comes up, and I'm always ready for it.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending, and that's it. It's a wrap for this week. See you all next time. Take care. Bye.
Sayonara. Bye-bye.
Bye.